All right, thank you. I'm calling the Town Council Special Study Session of October 10th, 2023 to order. I'll ask our clerk to take roll call, please.
Councilmember Rennie?
Here.
Councilmember Moore?
Here.
Councilmember Hudas?
Here.
Vice Mayor Badami?
Here.
Mayor Rista?
Here. Thank you. We have nobody from the council participating remotely. We're all here. And this is a special study session on one topic. So at this point in the meeting, we would normally go to verbal communication. Because we only have one item, I think it's helpful for the public if they get the staff report and we get into the item first. So people can speak at public comment after we launch into the item. So with that, we'll move to our one item, and Director Burnham.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Mayor and Council. First, thank you for setting a study session for this item. This is a tough topic to tackle at a late night meeting, so we really appreciate your willingness to meet out of cycle and be here to talk about this with us. And also, thanks to all the manager and attorney and all the staff I dragged through this with me. I'm joined by Erin Vaca from DKS Associates. She's our consultant who's been supporting us on this process. Also, Town Engineer Heap is here as well, so for question and answer, and of course, Director Paulson. So this memo and the item that was put before you is really a follow-up to our May meeting. So we came before you in May with really the first bits of information about our traffic impact fee. We were directed to update the fee program back in 2021. Staff has been working on this since early 2022. So another reason why we're really appreciative of the study session, because we're ready. We're ready to kind of be able to try to move this forward and wrap it up. The intent of tonight is really for us to get feedback. I think when we were here in May, we had heard some really specific questions from you all. So we really tried to craft this staff memo around answering those questions in the hope that it would kind of help us advance the conversation. So we don't expect, after tonight, we will take the feedback we receive here and we will come back with a proposed program. So I think these are the questions we kind of need to get to the heart of for us to be able to kind of finalize a potential fee schedule and really for us to be able to move forward with the modifications we need to make to our transportation impact policy. So I didn't prepare a specific presentation because I thought it might just be best to kind of walk through the memo and go question by question, unless you want to do it a different way, and I'm happy to defer to all of you.
For me, I think as we're working through this, as you pointed out, we're not going to be completing this item tonight. We're giving feedback so we can get to the next step. And so I think as we discussed, I think what is most helpful if as a council we go through the excellent staff report and the responses you had to the questions we generated, go through that, look at the recommendations. What I would like my fellow council members to do is as we look at these recommendations, I will be asking for a motion and a vote instead of just consensus so we really know where we are on this. That said, this is guiding staff in terms of how we form this policy, and then it will come back to us. So this is more of figuring out where we are now. And I also want to extend my appreciation to my fellow council members and our staff that we could set aside the time to have this as a study session. It makes so much more sense than trying to put it in to a big long meeting where we've got difficult things before and after, and we can just be focused. So thank you. So Councilmember Hudas.
A question for the town attorney. If we're taking votes in a study session, what does that mean?
You are giving direction to staff on next steps regarding the traffic impact fee. So it's not an ultimate decision on adoption of the fee, but it's a majority of the council directing staff on next steps.
And so is that binding or is it not binding?
Well, it's not binding in the sense that when the traffic impact fee comes to the council for adoption, any council member is free to vote yes or no. So it's not binding in that sense. But staff will be presenting a proposed ordinance and resolution based on what a majority directs staff to do. So it would be helpful if that was aligned with the ultimate decision.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I don't know if anyone has any preliminary questions or if we should go to public comment if there is any, and then I'll turn it back to further questions or moving through. So with that, I have no cards. I've got 3 people as attendees, although 2 are staff members. So my one non-staff member attendee, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. And if you'd like to listen, feel free to stay with us. All right, I'm not seeing a hand go up. So I'll close public comment on this item. And do any council members have any questions before we start moving through each item? Councilmember Moore.
One general question. So when we had talked about this at the council meeting, I got the sense that we were being somewhat ambitious as in comparison to other municipalities. Can you just say generally how what we're talking about here kind of stacks up against other municipalities in Santa Clara County?
Well, I think what we're talking about here isn't a dramatic change from what we talked about in May. It's more kind of nuances that could shift the fee up or down. I think the fact still remains that, and we're going to talk about project lists in item 1, the fee program is underpinned by a project list, and the town has a pretty ambitious program around transportation-related projects, and that's part of what drives the fee.
Thank you.
All right, well, with that, Director Burnham, would you like to go through the first
Sure. And
question and recommendation, and then we can ask questions on that and discuss it?
Yep, and I'm not going to do you the disservice of reading the memo, but we'll at least cover the kind of general issues of the question. So question 1 relates to the project list. In May, we talked about the fact that there are 2 basic factors for an impact fee. One is the cost of the projects that we want to get done. The other one is the amount of development we're going to have happen. So the question got put forward, could we have a less ambitious project list to lower our fee? So we've given you some information here. I think there were specific questions around eliminating the project that is the Highway 17, Route 9. Sometimes we call it congestion management project. Sometimes we call it highway interchange auxiliary lane project. So we did run an analysis of what that would look like, what the fee would look like. So I'll say 2 things. One is table 1 kind of shows you if we were to remove the Highway 17 project from the project list, shows you what the fees would be like. If you were to remove that project from the list, we cannot use future TIF collections to pay for that project. So right now, as of the current CIP, there's $600,000 of TIF money in there. So presumably in this project budget right now. So I think there's that consideration, but then I think if you want to see the entire project list, it was included as attachment 2 of the memo. And I'll leave it there. If you want to talk about any specific line items in that, we can.
Thank you. And, Councilmember Rennie.
I think we should just move this one along. Originally, I'm the one that kind of asked the question, why are we including this one? But I've since thought about it a lot more and believe that we should keep it in, and I'm willing to make a motion to keep the Highway 17 project in. I think it's appropriate because we have projects now on Alberta Way that are fairly large, a project that's coming at the lodge. So getting people to stay on the highway to get to those locations. We have a lot of projects that are going to be coming on Los Gatos Boulevard. The more we encourage people that don't happen to be going to Los Gatos Boulevard to not drive down it, but to stay on the highway if they're going to downtown or someplace further on. So after thinking it through, I think it's very relevant to supporting traffic around most of what we see for the projects coming. So my motion is to go ahead and keep it in.
Vice Mayor?
That sounds extremely reasonable, so I'll be seconding that.
I want to make a comment that it's more that I agree. I think, this addresses so many issues we have. This project was identified and was very high on the Measure B project list from Los Gatos, and it is a lot more than just the Highway 17 issue. It is changing that interchange, which is incredibly difficult to get on and off 17. It's really short. It's really problematic for pedestrians and cyclists and even drivers on Highway 9 with that kind of braided interchange, that crisscross. And so this fixes things on every level for every mode of transportation. And if we don't have projects that are coming forward with residents or business people that will benefit from that, we're not going to be able to pay for this at all. And so I'll be supporting the motion. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, at the last meeting, I had also raised a question about this, and upon reading the staff report, I think it makes a lot of sense. The part that I was thinking about was the prospect of separating the Highway 9 part from the Highway 17 part, but that's not what we're talking about here. And that is, I think, you can only cross Highway 17 on 3 roads in this town, and I think that's the single worst one by a long shot. And so I think that's very important. And so I'll be supporting Councilmember Rennie's motion.
All right, then I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you for that recommendation.
Okay,
Okay,
I like
next.
it. Thank you. Question 2.
Sorry, one question. Did the mayor want to open the public comment after the staff report or after this?
I did open it. I have
Okay.
no cards, and there's only one staff
Okay,
member on
thank you.
Zoom. Thank
Okay.
you. So we did open and close it, and I think it's just closed now, right? We won't open it with each item? Okay, thank you for checking.
Okay. So the second question, there had been a question regarding our ability to secure grant funding for the project list. So you can see in attachment 2 that we've made some assumptions about how much grant funding we might get. I took a moment in the memo to explain kind of how we arrived at some of those conclusions. Grant funding's never guaranteed. If we didn't include an assumption of grant funding, it would only raise the value of the project list and then raise the fee. So we're recommending that we leave in some assumptions about our ability to get grants, and nothing would preclude the town from getting more grant money for a specific project or from fully funding any one of the projects. It was just assuming grant funding is a way to manage the value of the list.
I have a question on that. So if a project is listed on here and we get more grant funding, we're not obliged to. The TIF money can go toward any and all projects that are on the list. We don't predetermine what percentage of TIF goes to which project or another. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so getting extra grant funding is not a problem.
Correct.
And getting slightly less grant funding is not a problem as long as okay.
Yes.
So this is just helpful for us. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. Yeah, a similar question. So just so I fully understand, so the only binding part about this project list is that these projects, these are the only projects that TIF money can go to. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
Great. Thank you.
All right, any further questions? I don't know. I guess we'll just, I guess we could vote on this. I mean, we're just accepting, I guess there was a question about that and we've got an answer.
It might be nice to hear a motion or feedback about actually accepting the overall project list. I mean, maybe you
Okay.
did that with the first one, but if you
No,
don't
I
feel
think,
like
yeah,
you
you're
did.
right. The first one was just that. So, okay, so do we have a motion about accepting the project list that we have as it sits in this memo? Or did anyone want, for some reason, to take a project off of it? Vice Mayor.
See no hands up, I'll go ahead and make a motion to accept the overall project list as presented in the staff report.
All right. Councilmember Moore.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I will call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you for reframing that for us.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So question 3 is where we start to get a little more technical. There was we got into some amount of detail about how the fees for various land uses are calculated, and a question came up about things that are in the kind of the background of the calculation, like trip length and bypass factors. And if you want to ask detailed questions about that, I'm going to let Aaron answer them. But we ran some analysis for you. Table 2 provides you the details, but ultimately, after that analysis, we would still recommend keeping the trip length factor in the calculations. If council wants to adopt reduced fees, we have other mechanisms to do that, but doing it by adjusting the back end calculations probably isn't the best way. So we still would recommend keeping that factor in place.
Thank you. Councilmember Hudes.
Yeah, what are some of the other ways that we could reduce fees if we wanted to?
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about some of them later tonight. With regard to, identifying specific land uses like housing that we know we want to incentivize, the council could choose to say we're going to adopt the fees at the rate that they're presented, but we're going to give discounts to certain types of housing. Or, we're telling you the rate should be, I'll just use round numbers, the calculations tell us the rate should be $20,000. When we come back to you with final rates and fees, you can just say, we think that's too high and we want it to be $15,000. You have a lot of flexibility here.
That was my biggest concern when we looked at it last time.
Right. And then, I'll make the reminder. I think we are going to want to look at fees for different usages, but we also have to understand as we reduce fees, we reduce the option to get projects done. And maybe we don't get our projects done, but, I'm hearing so much, especially with the housing element and the general plan, we have to build the infrastructure to go with this. This is how it gets done. As new projects come forward, they help pay for what we need to accommodate this. But I do think it will be important when we look at the end result to say, oh, wow, well, we really don't want to stop affordable housing or whatever. So do I have a motion on this item? Vice Mayor.
I move to retain the trip length factor in the calculations and adopting a reduced fee rate for specific land uses based on the town's goals for development.
Councilmember Moore.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, knowing we can make adjustments later. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Now we'll go to question 4 with the medical offices.
Sure. So another one of the questions we had was, it was a great question, actually, about medical offices specifically, and whether we could set a rate for those. So, and the answer is we can, and we showed you in the memo what that might look like. That said, we, even now in our current program, we have land uses that come in that don't fit like a T into the categories we have. And so we use the existing fee structure to then calculate fees for that specific land use. And I feel like I'm butchering that explanation. So I'm actually going to see if our town engineer, Gary Heap, can maybe say that a little bit more eloquently than I just did. But the bottom line is we have some flexibility. So.
Thank you, Gary Heap, town engineer with Los Gatos here. So if we had a different land use that would come in, what we would be doing is looking at the ITE trip generation rate, comparing that to the trip generation for housing, because we're setting our fees based on housing, and then set up a ratio to then give us the fee for that new land use. For instance, if you had something that came in at a much higher land use, like a drive-through restaurant or something like that, we could then set up that ratio against the housing trip generation, and then that would tell us again what we would charge for that specific type of land use.
And I think the point is we already do that under our existing program. Like, we already have that mechanism in place because we have to. We have to be able to do that because it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we can set a rate from, the council can set a rate for medical offices if you so choose. We recommend just allowing us to continue developing custom calculations for the impact fees, both where a proposed land use's trip generation characteristics differ substantially from those in our basic land use categories.
I have a question on that. So if we don't do anything about medical office tonight, would that take care of itself? If a new medical office came forward, would the trip generation be generated and it would be the same as what we're looking at now? Because then what it feels like to me is if we call out medical office tonight, we're silent on a whole bunch of other things, which it sounds like those calculations get taken care of as each option comes forward. So it sounds like there's no advantage to calling out a specific use tonight?
That's correct. So if you had a medical office building come in, for instance, you would look at the ITE trip generation rate for a medical office, compare that to the ITE trip generation rate for housing, and then set up a ratio and set the fees accordingly.
The dwelling unit equivalent?
Correct.
Okay, so it sounds like there's no advantage for us to specifically call this out, and we leave it to staff to look at each application. Councilmember Rennie?
So you said you were going to develop custom calculations for this. What does that mean, develop custom calculations?
It means that in the course of the review of the development, as we're reviewing the impacts of the development, we would work with their engineering team, determine the trip generation rates, and then set a calculation for them specifically. And it would just happen as part of the development review process.
Okay, I actually like that idea better because over the years I've come to realize that there's very different medical use offices. If you have a general practitioner, they've got somebody new coming every 15 minutes. You generate a ton of traffic, but some high-priced specialist may see 5 people a day, even though they have a space for more than that. So I think it makes sense to really be thinking about what exactly the use is in this case, and that sounds like what you would do in custom for each project. So I like that better than trying to force fit all medical office into one bucket.
Councilmember Hudes?
Thanks. I just wonder, is there any possibility of an applicant complaining that they're being treated unfairly if they are custom? Are the calculations made on an objective basis?
I'm going to ask the team to weigh in, but the calculations are pretty darn objective because they're using trip generation rate that's accepted standard in transportation engineering. I don't know that we've ever had anyone dispute them, but I don't.
In my experience over the years, I've done this several times, and as long as you explain it properly, it's accepted and it's not questioned.
Thank you.
Councilmember Moore?
Thank you. So, similar, kind of, along the same lines. So, the custom thing makes a lot of sense. I think that there's all kinds of uses that are going to generate all different kinds of traffic. Just so I have an idea of what this is going to look like, what would this medical office that you're using as an example in the staff report, what is that? Because that's kind of the numbers that I had in mind too, that this is, significantly more a medical office that's large and has a lot of patients coming in and out, is a significantly heavier strain on our roads than office space. So what are we looking at in the staff report in terms of what that project could look like?
I'm actually going to ask Erin because she ran the calculation to get to the 2.78 dwelling unit equivalents. So.
Yes, and I'm sitting here trying to remember which specific ITE code I used in that. I think it was for, just generic medical office. They did have a variety of options there, so there would be some variation depending on what kind of facility it actually is.
Okay, and so then as a follow-up, so our generic medical office in Los Gatos, staff is estimating is about double the amount of usage as we are saying offices?
That's what that table is saying, yes. Table 3 in the memo.
Okay. Seems...
For an average medical office based on whichever generation rate was selected. But,
and I don't need that helps me get my head around it, so thank you.
That was for a standalone medical office, ITE code 720, if anybody's interested.
Thank you.
Right, and then whether it's large or small, it's normalized per 1,000 square feet, so clearly it goes up if the office gets bigger.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so do I have a motion on this item based on the staff recommendation to not call out medical, but just know that we're going to be using, and the staff doesn't generate the ITE tables. This is kind of a tool of the trade, which I've had a lot of exposure to, having worked on moving from LOS to VMT when I was on the transportation commissions. So this is a chart you look up. Councilmember Moore.
And one more question. So, and again, just so I'm fully understanding this. So this custom only kicks in if we don't have something that we already are talking about, the multifamily, the single family. Is that right?
Correct. When we see development applications that don't kind of fit the mold of, and there would also be standard rates for retail, standard rate for office, and industrial, I think was the other one that we had.
Okay, and then, so my question with that is there any flexibility in terms of, we realized this is a, oh shoot, Costco uses there's way more car trips coming out of Costco, or does that not, if we have that use, that commercial use already set, do we just stick with that?
I'm actually going to let Gary answer that one.
So actually, Erin indicated, that the trip generation number she used was 720. There's 720 plus types of trip generation concepts or different key, separate, unique characters. So for big box, for your example, for a Costco, there would be a big box retail trip generation number. But we always have the ability, if there's something that doesn't quite fit the mold, to actually do traffic counts and compare the actual traffic counts that we would get for a project or a similar type of project, and then compare that to what trip generation would be in ITE, and then estimate based on actual numbers.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. That makes it seem very fair and reasonable, so thank you.
All right, anything else, or are we ready to have a motion to accept the staff recommendation? Vice Mayor?
I move to develop custom calculation of impact fees where a proposed land use trip generation characteristics differ substantially from those of the basic land use categories, and understanding that the calculations would be based on the adopted basic fee per dwelling unit equivalent or single-family dwelling unit, hoping that this approach would provide for a different fee rate for medical office uses.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
Okay, and a second. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed. Motion passes 5-0. We'll now go to question 6 with size of housing.
Okay, so in May, we talked and ran you through the idea that for residential uses, both multifamily and single family, we're going to have to take all these fees and convert them to a square footage cost. And we had presented the square footage cost, and council really appropriately asked a great question about why where we got our square footages from, and were they lower than average. So thanks to Director Paulson and his team, we pulled the data for both recent multifamily ADU development as well as single family, and we're able to calculate numbers that are indeed higher than what we had, which also then means that the square foot cost for residential goes down. So we presented that data to you in Table 4 in a comparison, and we are recommending that we use localized data for the square footage of houses. So that would be 3,660 square feet as the basis for single family residential, and 1,649 square feet as the basis for multifamily, to do the per square foot fee calculation. And you can see from Table 4 that will drop our square footage fee dramatically.
Okay. I'm stunned at how big the houses are. And this is new housing. This isn't average size of houses in Los Gatos.
Correct.
Okay. Which, of course, we're only applying these fees to new housing. So, okay. Any comments from council members? It looks like people are thinking. Council Member Moore?
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. This is helpful. So it's one of the things that I had thought and talked about when we talked about this last time is that multifamily is more, the fees for multifamily are more expensive than the comparable fees for single family. And that seems out of line for me. I think that this is for a single family home, this is going to end up being a, few $1,000s to maybe low tens of thousands of dollars fee. And for multifamily, this is going to balloon into, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars on a larger project. And so my concern is just that we have, it seems like they should, be the same or be switched. It seems like in a way we're punishing multifamily when I think that's the kind of housing that we're trying to see in our housing element and general plan. Have you thought about that, and what is kind of staff's thought on how this impacts multifamily specifically?
Yeah, we've definitely given this a lot of thought, and I think we're going to hit on a couple of future questions that sort of get to the meat of this. I think, again, bringing it back to the idea that the fees we're presenting here are what the math works out to. When we come back to you with a proposed fee schedule, if you want to incentivize multifamily, you can drop that fee. You won't be able to raise the single family one because that we're telling you what the maximum fee can be, but you'll be able to set fees at any level lower than what we're proposing. So I think keep that in mind, because I think that's a conversation you're gonna start into it tonight, but when we come back with final fees, we're gonna need to have that conversation. And I think that's how we're gonna get through that conversation is what does council want to incentivize in terms of development?
Go ahead.
And then a follow-up to that. So I kind of forgot we talked about this last time, but I'm just remembering it now that we're talking about the maximums here. So is there because we're changing what we're saying the average home size is in Los Gatos, if in the future we do want to drop the multifamily sum, does it make sense to... I worry about not being able to the single family being too low to not be able to pay for all of our projects, especially if in the future we want to change some of these. Would there be a reason to keep maybe both for the sake of argument at the smaller square footage, higher dollar amount, so we can have flexibility there? I don't know if I'm asking the question the right way, but yeah. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense. The fee, and I think when you start to look at the square footage calculation, it kind of confuses the issue of the fee. Because if you look at table 4, the second column, traffic impact fee per unit, it's the same, right? It's the same for a single family house no matter what. It only gets lower when we go to a bigger square footage. So I don't know if I'm answering the question very well, but the fee is going to be the fee. It becomes a matter of how it gets applied.
No, that makes sense. So that's very helpful. This average is just an average. So we're looking at in the third column, you're telling us how this would apply on an average home in Los Gatos, but those are going to change a lot.
Fair.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for bailing me out. Yes, that is, you are correct about that. So yeah. Yep, that's true.
Okay, cool. Then with that, so my continued concern is how that impacts multifamily versus single family, but I'm hearing that we can have that conversation when we have that conversation.
Right. As I look at it, the overall, if you get average homes built, the fee for multifamily unit, the smaller multifamily unit versus a larger single-family home is lower. But when you break it, so for a multifamily home at 1649 square feet, the fee is $9,000. For a single-family home at 3660, it's $12,661. So if you start getting average units, multifamily is paying less per unit, but they're definitely paying more per square foot. So as soon as you get a comparable single-family home in square footage to a multifamily home, the multifamily is paying more. And that's sort of per square overall. If you had a multifamily home that was 2,000 square feet and a single family home that's 2,000 square feet, the multifamily is going to pay more because we're charging more per square foot. And that is sort of flummoxing to me. Why multifamily generates more car trips than a single family home. Because that's what it gets down to, right? I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if Aaron has kind of tackled these kind of questions in other jurisdictions or with other studies.
Because, at the top of my head, I would think they'd either be the same or actually it should be less per square foot for a multifamily home. So, Aaron?
Yeah, this is just kind of a artifact of the calculations and the fact that we needed to have some means of scaling relative transportation demand over different land uses. And so we turned to the ITE trip generation rates, which has been mentioned are industry standards. So
I'm not sure if your microphone is on.
okay.
I just want to make sure that you're heard on the recording and for everybody else.
Okay.
So if you could start over, please.
Sure. So the reason we get this result is we're scaling the relative transportation demand of the different land uses, as been mentioned, by using the ITE trip generation rates. Those rates are given on a per unit basis. And so while the trip generation rate of a single family unit is higher than that of a multifamily unit, and single family homes do tend to be larger than your average apartment, but the travel demand is not like a linearly falling by the square footage size of the unit. So you do get this kind of unfortunate situation where the apparent cost per square foot for a multifamily unit is higher than that, comparable square footage in a single family unit. So as was mentioned, another way to remedy that would be consider modifying the multifamily fee schedule, for affordable units, things like that.
Okay. I'm still a little stuck. I'll go to Councilmember Rennie and then Councilmember Hudes.
So this actually makes sense to me if you think about it. In a single-family home, each person really has more square feet that they live in than in a multifamily unit. People tend to be in smaller rooms, maybe even more people. And what we're trying to figure out is the number of car trips. Well, car trips are really going to be related to the people that are there, right? Or other factors. But other factors even, it's really going to be the number of people that are there. So in a single-family home that's 3,600 square feet, the impact fee is actually larger because you probably do have an average of more people living in that unit, but not by that much. It gets back to traffic, and I would also caution, if you think about what's coming and what's going to be built, it's going to be multifamily units. There's not going to be very many single-family units built in town to carry the weight of the cost. So if you actually want to be able to do the projects to support the people in the multifamily units, you can't reduce the fees by very much.
Councilmember Hudes?
Yeah, so I wanted to understand how this table would be applied. So if, for instance, we adopted the single family at 1,671 square feet with a fee per unit of $12,661, and then we got an application for 3,660, which is more typical, would that mean that the fee would be more than double, like $24,000?
The fee would be the $3,660 times the $12.03. So yes.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
I was getting a no from.
Oh. Yeah. Okay.
Right, so we have
So
the rate
that
in the
would-
far right column. So it would go from
Correct.
549 per square foot to 1,203 per square foot. And then
Okay.
multiply that by the square feet.
Okay, so that would mean that a typical single family, the fee would be over $24,000, and if we kept the average for the multifamily, then the fee would be $9,000. If we used the national average for the multifamily, and we used the national average for the single family, we used the local average for the multifamily, then the fee would be $24,000 versus $9,000. Is that correct?
Can I ask you to just run that one more time?
Okay, so what I started was asking that if we adopted the national average 1671 and we got a typical application, which is 3660, then would the traffic impact fee be related to that? Would it be in fact over $24,000 per unit?
The answer to that was yes.
Okay, and if we did not change the multifamily, but kept that as per the recommendation to go with local, then the single family would be 24,000 and the multifamily would be 9,000. Is that correct?
The 1,649 times 8.71 is what it would be.
What I'm saying is
Yes.
if we went with the recommendation and got a typical multifamily, in other words, if we split the recommendation and we went with the national average for single and the local average for multi, the fee per single family would be over 24,000 and the fee per multi would be 9,000 at the typical average.
I think it
that
would
we
be
get.
really high. I mean, when I do 12.03 times 3660, I'm getting, $44,000.
Higher than 24, yeah. Yeah, I was just doing that calculation in my head, and obviously I was off, but it would be significantly higher. It'd be 1203 times
3,600.
60, which would be 40,000.
That one makes sense to me. Run the multifamily, you're saying multifamily used the 1,649 though.
Yeah,
it
that
lowers the
seemed to
fee.
be what the discussion
Okay.
would be. So we'd have
Yep.
a multi coming in at 9,000 and a single coming in at 40,000.
Yep.
Okay, that doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't. It the logic makes sense, but the impact doesn't make sense in terms of the traffic impact. So I think that the recommendation to use local makes sense because that's what we typically get. And if we don't do that, we're going to be further off in our understanding of the impact.
And the only thing I would need to ask, and probably we can't answer it tonight though, is if you were to split and try to use national average for one category and local for another, if that opens up some liability potentially. It seems like we'd want to use one or the other, but I don't know if the town attorney has opinion.
Well, it's legislation, so it has to be reasonable. Tonight I'm not thinking of a reason that it'd be reasonable to use local for one and national for another. I mean, unless there were evidence that the town's planning applications for multifamily are matching the national square footage average.
Councilmember Rennie.
I also don't think that works because at the end of the day, you need to add the dollars up to the project cost. What we're doing, if we split it and took these numbers, we'd end up with, and we got all the building that you were calculating, we'd end up with more dollars than the project costs. So you'd have to go back and readjust the numbers if we did that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we looked at what the national averages were. We asked about what is happening locally, and these were adjusted to what we're typically getting. So it seems reasonable to me that if this is what we're typically getting, hopefully it'll be what we keep getting. We'll still be generating the fees. It's just we'll be getting larger units than the calculation originally took into account, in my mind. Councilmember Hudes.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'd be prepared to make a motion
Please do.
to follow the staff recommendation that we use 3660 as a basis for single and 1649 as a basis for multifamily.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I'll second it. Okay. And I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed. Passes 5-0. We'll stick with that recommendation. Thank you. Number 7, the impact fee on accessory dwelling units. And that was a good report. Thank you.
Okay, so the next item was about ADUs. We currently do not charge fees on ADUs at all in the town, although state law would allow us to charge on units over 750 square feet. So we did some analysis, and because we don't currently charge for ADUs, all the ADUs that are considered in the housing element and in our general plan were not included in the calculations. So if council were to say we want to charge impact fees for ADUs, we would add more units to the housing calculation, which would actually lower all the fees across the board because we'd have a higher number of units. So we gave you some analysis of that, but we do ultimately recommend charging on ADUs in excess of 750 square feet. If you agree with that, we will update the fee calculations. So when we come back with final fees, you should see lower fees in general than what you've seen in the past. And we also would come back with a revised transportation impact policy to reflect that change in the charges for ADUs.
Thank you. I mean, I'll make a comment. I think this is really helpful. We do want to incentivize affordable ADUs, and the smaller ones most likely would be affordable. Given that we're probably, as I read forward, going to be wanting to give some relief in our fees to deed restricted, the affordable housing at the lower levels, and we may not want to collect the fees there. I think for larger ADUs where we cannot require deed restriction, it makes sense to pick up the fees there where that can have an impact. So I really like this recommendation. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. So on these, what fee calculation would you be using? Would ADUs be custom? Would you create a whole separate category for ADUs, or how would you do that?
That's a good question. I think they would. That's a good question. Single family?
ADUs as multifamily units in the calculation. That was the quantity of housing that was reduced. Could potentially consider instead adding them to the single family category if that would have the effect of the lower cost per square foot. So it's kind of a policy call, really.
Councilmember Rennie and then Councilmember Hudes.
I'm not sure that makes sense, because really it should be tied back to trip generation, and an ADU is not going to generate as much, certainly not as many trips as a full single family home, and I don't think it would typically generate as much as a multifamily. So it makes sense to me that you make a third category for it. I don't, a multifamily, I don't know what the trip generation is. If it's 2, then an ADU is 1.5 or something like that. But it seems to me there's more analysis that needs to be done, and it probably should be in a separate category. Does staff want to react to that?
Well, I'll ask Erin if she has a comment about that. Otherwise, I would suggest, I think you're right. These questions are good questions. So if there's appetite for this, maybe we need to go back and do a little bit of analysis and sort of tell you advantages and disadvantages of a couple of different scenarios.
Yeah, I'll just comment. I think the reason we did lump them in with the multifamily units is we assumed there would be a lower trip generation than a typical single family unit, but I don't believe there's a separate ITE code. I'll double check that, but we would have to research some data source to compare it as a category of its own.
And it is per square foot, so it's hard for me to imagine an 800 square foot ADU is going to generate more or less traffic than an 800 square foot condo or something, or apartment. But I mean, it is normalized by square foot, which is helpful. Councilmember Hudes.
Yeah, a couple of questions. One, is there any possibility of an applicant completing that traffic impact fee so that the traffic impact fee is The first question is, what are other municipalities doing, particularly ones that are relying on ADU production to meet their RENA allocation? So thanks.
I can speak to one other local jurisdiction that I know charges impact fees on ADUs in excess of 750 square feet, but we'd have to do a little more research. I don't know, Aaron, if you've seen other jurisdictions and what they're doing, or Gary, if you, in your experience.
I don't know of any specific examples off the top of my head that charge differential fees for ADUs.
Thank you. That might be something worth looking at. 500 units is a significant portion of the 2,000 that we're trying to meet. And so, I would be interested in that. If we look at that, I mean, conceptually, it makes sense to charge fees on larger ADUs, and some of the ones that I've seen in town are large and probably generate more trips. In fact, some of them might even have parking for 3 spaces and things like that. So there's probably significant trip generation in some of the larger ADUs. So I'd be interested in further information on that. The other question I had,
following up on that question, I think Engineer Heap has answer also.
Thank you, Mayor. I know in my previous jurisdiction we did charge for ADUs above the 750 square foot per square foot.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Continue, Council Member. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just thought there was more information.
Yeah, the other question was, it says there are 500 new ADUs assumed in the 2040 general plan. I'm trying to understand the relevance of the 2040 general plan and that number that's been suspended.
So yes, it has. Our calculations still continue to rely on the housing numbers in that plan. Frankly, the calculations were done when before the plan was rejected, and we continue to use those numbers and rely on them. If we were to drop back to the 2020 plan, all of the number of housing units would go down, at which point our fees all go up. So, because the denominator in the equation goes, because the 2020 plan had fewer proposed housing units. So all of these fees are underpinned by the 2040 plan.
I have a question. I mean, whether it's the 2040 plan or not, what we saw or what we were projecting is about 25 ADUs a year, correct? That's where that calculation comes from. And so
I guess the other question would be, could we use our housing element as the basis for the housing numbers instead of the referended land use? So that might be something we could evaluate.
Which is the same number, right? 25 a year? Okay. So we do have another document that's in place that estimates, based on historical data, that we'll get about 25 housing or ADUs a year. Okay, Councilmember Hughes.
Yeah, and just to follow up, so if that were the case, which seems to make sense, it would be over an 8-year period rather than a 20-year period, because that's what's in the housing element, correct?
Thank you for the question. I'll go ahead and jump in. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. You're correct. So we would need to change that number, which, as was mentioned before, will then likely increase the remainder of the numbers because they'll be working with a smaller number.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rennie and then Vice Mayor.
So I will, after the mayor's comments, I'll withdraw my concern. I think she's right. It does normalize because an ADU of 800 square feet, if we're going with our local average, which we said, I think we said, did we already decide that? Then it's going to be about half the cost of a multifamily unit, which seems to make sense. An 800 square foot would be about 7,000 total, it looks like, for the two categories. And that seems to make sense to be able to just throw it in with the multifamily now that I think that through. The question I think we're on is whether ADUs should carry some of the burden of paying for the improvements. And thinking it through, I'm thinking yes, because I don't think a $7,000 fee is going to incentivize anybody from building an ADU. But if it helps lower the costs on multifamily units have many units, and so that number starts to become a significant number to help a builder maybe even add more units or something to that effect. So it makes sense to me to go ahead and include ADUs, and I'm okay throwing them in the multifamily category using the dollars per square foot.
Yeah, and I would argue that if the fee is a disincentive, the ADU can be 750 feet or smaller. So, and that's another thing. We did want to kind of incentivize smaller ADUs, affordable by design kind of thing. So I think it can strike a balance, and I do agree that as something that's going to generate traffic and potentially be housing, we need to make sure that we take care of, the demand, right, to get that infrastructure. Vice Mayor, your hand was up, right?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question for Mr. Heap. You commented on a jurisdiction that you had familiarity with. Can you identify that just for comparison's sakes?
Yeah, that was my previous jurisdiction, the city of Gilroy.
Thank you.
All right, I'm hearing some thoughts around this. Do we have a motion? I'll go with Councilmember Rennie.
I'll make the motion to include ADUs over 750 with the traffic impact fees, TIF fees, VMT fees, and so forth, and include it in the multifamily category.
Okay, Councilmember Moore?
I'll second, but I just do have one final question or thought on this, and this is something we can talk about when we bring this back or whatever, but if an ADU, we're talking about 5% of the cost. If we say an ADU costs $200,000 to build in Los Gatos, which I think is right-ish, maybe it's 300, but it's about 5% of the total cost, which is significant. I think it's more significant than it is for a single-family home or a multifamily. So I'm still interested in seeing what Councilmember Rennie talked about. If other jurisdictions have done different ADU calculations, I'd like to see that because I do think it's a pretty different thing. But I'll second the motion for now.
Thank you. And, what I've seen is a lot of single-family homes that are being proposed have the ADUs built in. And so I do think that as they're larger, that will have a traffic impact. Councilmember Hudes.
Yeah, I'll support the motion, but I do think that it makes sense to bring back more information when this comes to us again, because I think we will probably need to rely even more on ADUs here, given the constraints on some of the other sites that have been proposed. So.
All right, we have a motion and a second and some comments. I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. No one opposed. Motion passes 5-0 with a request for more information about how other jurisdictions handle this. All right. So it looks like we're now moving to multifamily.
Question 8, which I think is probably the question of the night. You've kind of been touching on it over time. So the question came up about can the town adopt reduced fees for multifamily housing, and what might that look like? And the answer is yes. So as I talked about earlier, we're going to propose to you and present to you the maximum fee that we can charge, and then you're going to need to make some decisions about what you want to incentivize. And so we'd like to recommend that we continue to move forward with calculations for the maximum fee, and then when we come back for you to adopt a fee, talk about what you might want to do to rejigger fees to incentivize certain types of development.
Thank you. What I appreciated were two things in here. One is, as we get further down, we can talk about if we want to reduce fees for certain levels of affordability. I also appreciated that it was pointed out that as a project comes before us, we have the option to reduce fees for a specific project if we wanted, if for some reason that made sense or that was the will of the council, but we can never go back up again. So starting with the higher fee and then having the opportunity to potentially incentivize things or to have further discussion as we move on would give us a little bit of freedom. Councilmember Brenny.
Yeah, so I'm fine not making the decision tonight, but I'll give some thoughts on it anyway for people to stew on, and I'll keep stewing on also. I was thinking this through actually from sort of a no net loss issue. We're going to get most projects now bringing us 20% low income so that they can get all of the incentives and the waivers and be eligible for SB 330 timelines and all those kind of things. So I think we're going to get a boatload of low income, but we're not going to get any in the very low or the extremely low. And I see us at the end of the day overdoing our low income, but yet still not meeting our RENA because we don't have any very low or extremely low on the list. So trying to get some in that category might be worth completely waiving fees for something in those categories, in the very low or extremely low, to try to get developers some incentive to go a little bit deeper. But again, we don't need to make that decision tonight, but something to stew on.
Thank you. Councilmember Hudes.
Yeah, so a couple questions with regard to the, are we on to question 9 at this point?
We're still on question 8.
Okay.
So we're just talking about multifamily in general.
Okay. It's hard for me to weigh in on 8 without looking at 9.
Right.
So
well, we can discuss all of them, but I think what we're talking about is 8, and then we'll start talking about exceptions, or if we want to make those decisions tonight, or talk about them later. If you'd prefer to just open it up to the next one and then bridge back, I'm fine with that. I don't want to inhibit the thought process or discussion.
Well, the staff recommendation is to look at 9. The staff recommendation for 8 is to look at 9. So
let's do that.
Do we need a vote? Yeah. So I had a question about the calculations, and so when we are talking about affordable, are we talking what categories are we talking about? Is that extremely low, very low, low, moderate? Is that included?
So a couple of different ways to answer that question. In the introduction of question 9 in the second paragraph, I give you RENA numbers for all of the categories. And then when we start talking about in table 5 potential reductions or credit programs, and again, and you know, we call it a reduction here, but I think the implication is it would be a credit. So we'd adopt a base fee, but then I'll offer credit to, you know, of however much to, and the staff recommendation is low, very low, and extremely low. Okay. But our current policy does kind of lump moderate into that as well. So there's another conversation to have there.
Okay, that helps. One more question, and that is, these are being calculated at, are these being calculated at a 20% level of affordability when in fact more likely with density bonuses, the actual number of units would probably be in the 13 to 15% range?
I think the credit would get applied per unit per development. So if a development has 100 units and 80 of them are market rate, they'll pay those 80 pay the full fee. The other 20 that are at the affordability criteria and that meet the affordability criteria and are deed restricted would then get the reduced fee.
But then they'll get a density bonus and they'll get more units, and those units are not going to be affordable.
They'll still pay, they'll pay fee on those bonus units.
Okay, so when we're considering this, I think it's important that we think about if we are going to make a reduction for the low, very low, and low, extremely low, more likely that's going to be 13 to 15% of the units in actuality.
Right, but that doesn't impact the fee per unit. So regardless of what the percentage is, the market rate has to pay the market rate, and if we can incentivize the lower, and we can decide if we want to incentivize that.
If I could just remark, yeah, it wouldn't affect the fee per unit, but when we do the calculation of the total fees, we don't want to overestimate by thinking actually, we don't want to underestimate, get the impact wrong because we think they're going to be 20%.
Correct.
And to be clear, we wouldn't adjust the fees to make that assumption. We would still be proposing, based on the full project list.
Correct. Okay.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. So does this, if we put this policy in place, let's say it's in place in December, does that impact and maybe this is a question for the community development director, but would this impact SB 330 pre-applications? Would they have to pay this or no?
Thank you. Again, Joel Paulson, and I will rely on the town attorney as well. But my understanding is that they have vested to the rules that are in place now, and since these are not in place, they would not apply.
That's correct.
Okay, that's kind of what I figured as well, which I think makes Councilmember Rennie's comment on a few items ago to my question about multifamily all that more relevant, because it's true that we are going to have a lot of multifamily, and they're going to be there's going to be impacts, and we're kind of relying on those to get these things done. So I think that does make sense. And I also like, with that in mind, the suggestion of potentially waiving or doing something very, trying to create a strong incentive for the ELI and the very low income. Because I think I agree that those are, again, there's not going to be a lot of those in these projects. And so as much as we can incentivize them, I think, is good. But yeah, I think it's important as we think about this, thinking about the answer just now that this isn't going to impact a lot of the big projects that are already in the pipeline.
Right. I mean, this is actually why I was trying to push, and staff was working hard to get this here so that we can get this in place before any more projects vest. We want to make sure that we have our fees updated so that as newer projects come along, and we know there will be more, we expect more. Our housing element is here to encourage more housing, that we have these fees in place before any more vest. So it is important that we get this work done. So do we have any traction on this item? I'll make the motion that we keep the, I'll go back to item 8 before we get to item 9 and go with the recommendation that we adopt the fully calculated fees for multi-housing developments and consider credit programs to offset certain categories of units. That's my motion. Councilmember Moore?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, no one opposed, 5-0. Now we go to question 9, where we talk about, could we reduce fees for affordable housing? What would it look like? And we did have some discussion around that. Councilmember Rennie.
Yeah, as I was saying, I don't think we should give any reduction for the low, because they're already super incentivized by giving all of the SB 330, the density bonus, the exceptions. They're already super incentivized. I don't think we need to incentivize them anymore. So I would make a motion that we don't give reduced fees for moderate or low, but we actually waive or give a credit for ELI and very low.
I have a question for the town attorney. So the percentage of inclusionary is 20% if it's moderate, 15% if it's low, very low, or extremely low? Or where's the switch over?
Well, there's two things at play. There's the state density bonus law, and that has different densities that are available depending on the percentage of affordability. And so the lowest would be, I believe it's 20% low income, gets you at the bottom level of where the incentives begin. And then as far as the town's regulations, I know there's a difference between for sale and for rent. I can't remember the percentages that the town requires, but I can look that up.
Okay, so there is no, if somebody proposes 20% moderate, all these things don't kick in. Is that true? It has to get to low or lower affordability level?
Our local regulation requires a certain percentage of moderate, I believe, but I'm going to defer to the community development director also. And then as far as the state law goes, the density bonus benefits kick in at the low income category.
Okay, perfect. Then I understand. Did you have anything, Director Paulson?
Yes, thank you. So as the town attorney was explaining, our BMPs are based on a formula up until 100 units or more, and then once you get to 100 units or more, then it's 20%. And so those are currently based on our guidelines split between low and moderate.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that insight, Councilmember Runny. Councilmember Moore.
So a little bit of a general question, but does the fact that maybe half of our 2,000 units are already have a pre-application or an application? I don't know what the actual number is, but it seems like maybe half have a pre-application, like if that we have 1,000 units kind of in the pipeline. Does that change anything for this in terms of being able to fund what we're talking about?
I'm going to let Aaron chime in on that one. I mean, I think yes, on the surface, I think it does.
Well, I might jump in on that one. So the State Mitigation Fee Act requires the town to calculate the fee based on the impacts of the proposed development. And so we can't charge a higher fee to latecomers based on the fact that earlier applicants vested to a lower fee. We don't get to make up the difference. It has to be a straight up calculation of what the town thinks the impacts are of specific types of development.
And we will collect our existing impact fees on those developments. It just would be at the current rate.
Got it. And
Yes, I was going to say we did base the expected number of growth units on the general plan, but we removed that number, that portion that was in the pipeline at that time. So it is worth going back and checking if that number should be potentially reduced by any projects that have, come online in the last year or so, if it's thought to be significant.
And I'll just also highlight the fact that this very question is why I hope you'll see us back here pretty quickly with trying to wrap this up, just so we can finalize something.
and
We don't have a second yet for the motion.
Oh, that's right. So I made the motion.
oh, I'll second, but I had another question about that.
Okay. So now we have a motion and a second discussion.
Thank you. So yeah, because I to your point, if this is based on about a year ago, I think it's a huge difference in terms of the applications or pre-applications. Do you, Director Burnham, do you know about what percentage of the proposed fee the existing fee is? I remember I remember reading what it was, but I don't. Yeah, it's around like half, right? It's pretty.
Just looking back on the single Whoops, hold on. I don't. I'd need to do some math for you. Unless, do you remember off the top of your head? No.
From what I recall, the existing fee works out to about $9,000 per single family dwelling unit.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess that's just all to say, yeah, I think looking at, how this has changed is going to be important. Because I do think we want to make sure we fund all of these great projects.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm not seeing any other hands raised for discussion, so I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed. Motion passes 5-0.
I'm sorry to do this, but can you
Yeah.
clarify that motion for me? Just so I'm sure I know what it was.
Good question. We're on,
My motion was to not do any reduction for moderate or low, but to waive or give credit for ELI and very low.
Perfect, thank you. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something in there.
thank you. And we all know what we voted on, correct? Yes. Okay, good. So now we've got question 9.
The town manager just made a really good point. Should we talk a little bit about what level of credit you might like to see for extremely low and very low? Is it, we kind of, in the staff recommendation, threw out 50% because I've seen that in some other communities, but.
I thought my motion was a complete credit to no charge.
That was my understanding as the seconder.
Thank you.
Okay, and then for fellow council members, so no slight reduction for low, just low pays the same. Okay, moderate and low pay the same. All right, so I think we have clarity on that. Yes, Councilmember Moore.
And one quick thing, just because we didn't talk, at length about that. If that, I would want to know if that totally throws things off for whatever reason, because that is a total waiver. It doesn't seem like it should, because there's not going to be that many of those, but yeah.
Yes, and that's a great question, because when it comes back to us, we'll probably want to know what the impact of our decisions are, plus or minus. Councilmember Hudes.
Yeah, that's really a question. When it does come back, is there going to be a model of the total of this on our budget?
On the budget, meaning a revenue projection for each year?
Yeah, correct. Whether it's each year or over a period of time, will we understand what the financial impact is of the changes that are being proposed?
I think we'll need to document those through one by one, for each of the decisions, so that as you go through your decision-making process and adopting the fee, you understand, what the financial impact could be.
I mean, I'm interested in the overall impact, particularly an overall impact using the legally adopted general plan, which includes changes that are being proposed at the housing element level.
So that's part of the discussion that we had a little bit earlier, and there was a request that we would do some additional analysis based on the 2020 general plan as potentially amended with the pending housing element. As you mentioned, that's for an 8-year period instead of a 20-year period, so we can run that calculation. And now we had the other discussion about, well, let's look also at what's in the pipeline, so that way we have, a more of a real sense of the units that would be affected by this fee proposal.
Yeah,
so that is analysis we would want to do and bring back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like number 10 is basically the same almost as 9 in terms of the end results, but
I would agree that it is. It just gives you some examples of what other communities are doing and considering for credit programs. So
to fellow council members, we voted to do the credit for the very low, the 2 lowest categories. And so I don't think we need to do anything on this. Question 11, can we consider a credit program for completed improvements?
And our staff recommendation was just that our current policy already affords us the flexibility to do this. So, to the extent that a developer wants to make their own offsite improvements, if they're on our list, we would work that out with them and afford them the opportunity to do that.
Right, so instead of imposing a fee while they're doing their project, they can do fees, they can do the improvements that are on the list that would match up for the value of what they owe us.
Correct. It just gets a little we make clear that we're not giving them money back for work.
Right,
yeah.
Right. If they
So,
do more,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
their choice.
Yeah.
I don't know if Director Paulson had, okay, I couldn't tell if there's a microphone there. Councilmember Moore.
I was just going to ask if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I think that there are upcoming projects that are interested in that and could potentially be, we've seen some things that are projects or discussions about projects that want to do more, that want to make these like above and beyond changes, or that we're trying to, or that the neighbors want to do that or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to ask Town Engineer Heap to talk about that, only because he's the one that ends up having to negotiate all of these issues.
If I could you provide an example? I'm not clear on the question.
Well, I'm a little hesitant to weigh in because we're talking about a current proposal about the Mulberry site in Bellwood. That site, the developer has discussed potentially doing more than is what is required by the town, and so as long as we're not, at risk of weighing in on the merits or not of that, I'm curious what the process looks like.
So if a developer came in and proposed public improvements, transportation improvements that were above and beyond, we would still look at the amount of traffic impact fees that they would be paying and could waive up to, or recommending waiving up to, the full amount of their traffic impact fee, so long as they are installing or constructing improvements at that value or higher. So if their impact fee is round number $1 million and they're doing $2 million worth of improvements, we would then credit them $1 million of their traffic impact fees, as they would be paying no fee.
That makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments? Town Attorney.
I just wanted to clarify a statement I made about the state density bonus law. There is also a state density bonus available for sale moderate income projects, in addition to the low income. Okay.
Perfect. But we're not going to be giving a discount for that at this point, so that's good to know.
And I'll just add one thing to what Engineer Heap just said, that the improvements to be made sort of need to be improvements we already need as part of our traffic impact fee program for them to get the credit. They can't create a whole different project that they decide we need. So.
Right. So if someone proposes giving us a dog park, that's not one of our transportation things. That does not waive a traffic impact fee, for example.
Correct.
Okay. Councilmember Moore.
And so just again to get my arms around what that looks like. So I assume there's like a bit of a back and forth there in terms of, hey, you're proposing this project. We did this traffic analysis and we see that this is going to be the result. Here's some options you have in making some really significant, if you want to invest a lot of money, you want to put up a, whatever. Here's some of the things you could do.
Yes. And it would be focused though on the list and attachment 2.
Okay.
Councilmember Hudes.
Just to throw a hypothetical out there, what if we were negotiating with a developer and came up with the idea for bike and pedestrian overcrossing from their property to a trail, let's say? Is that, and we're not something that we're on the list currently, but it would be related very much to that development. Is that something that we could waive impact fees for?
I can give that some thought. I mean, my gut reaction is no, because the impact fee is tied to the list of capital improvements that the town is anticipating. But I could see a scenario where perhaps the town might enter into an agreement with the applicant to get that benefit in exchange for some other benefit to the developer that might not be a waiver of an impact fee, but it might be some other concession granted by the town.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, yes. Aaron.
I just wanted to add to that, just a reminder is that the nexus for the transportation impact portion of the fee is based on improvements made to the townwide, what we call townwide circulation element. So we don't have projects that, for example, are on local streets that only provide access to private, certain properties. So if such an improvement were proposed that was really closely tied to use of one development, I don't believe that would qualify as something that could be funded as part of the fee program, and therefore couldn't give credit for that type of project.
Thank you. And I think it's just a reminder, there's a lot of different things that developments touch and do, but tonight we're specifically talking about traffic impact fees and how that will benefit the projects we need to move forward. It doesn't preclude developers. They'll still have their art fee, they'll have some other things, school impact fees, and whatever they're building, they'll have to come up to code or the latest on what we need right on that spot, sidewalk and all that. Okay, this was really useful. Did anybody else have any closing comments? Otherwise, I'm going to thank everyone and adjourn the meeting.